It's time for that event you've all been waiting for. It's time to kill the worst figures of the year. And what's funny is, last year I was only barely able to fill out the worst list of 2021. I had to cheat and include some disappointing figures on it. That I still wouldn't have actually called bad at all. This year, I'm disqualifying all red figures from appearing, and I still had no such trouble. Despite the fact that I'd say that 2022 was probably an even better year for the Transformers. Unfortunately, most of the bad figures are going to be coming from the same single source, and you can all probably guess what that is. And sadly, while there were 2 Chug figures on the best of this year, and last year there were 7 there, plus the worst of 2021 was actually a third-party figure, this year the worst list only contains Chug. It feels unfair, but anything else wouldn't be truthful. Unlike the best of list, I'm not going to be filming any new segments for these. They don't deserve it. Number 10. 86 Sludge. Yep, that's right. The 10th best of the year is showing up on the worst list in an identical position. Why? Because this is Schrodinger's figure. It exists in a quantum state of excellent and awful that collapses into one or the other reality when you open the box. This is up there with the best sludges ever made, even when taking third party into account. It's hands down the most accurate one, it's one of the most posable, it's got one of the very few accurate alt modes, and it's got a top tier transformation for sure, putting all other sludges to shame. And then like 70% of all of the 86 figures just come unfixably broken. Hasbro, what the fucking hell are you doing? Did you hire a bunch of screeching gibbons to put these together? Did you outsource your quality control to the local rehab center? Is your factory up 3 floors and you don't want to walk down the stairs, so you're just throwing the figures out the window to get them down to the shipping department? This figure should not be on this list. This figure should have been halfway up the best of year. And yet we can't have nice things because, like with too much of this list, QC just doesn't exist with Hasbro anymore. Number 9. Legacy Dead End. This was the chosen one, sent to deliver Menasor from darkness. Instead, it just cast it into dark. Okay, that metaphor fell apart almost immediately, but this would be bad enough with its posing to warrant a slot on this list if the transformation weren't borked on the QC as well. So some people's work just fine if you clip the heels in, but then you can end up like me where it doesn't help and you have to chop off the tab meant to hold the feet together to get everything to sit flush. And then there's something still off about it, so there's still a gap. I don't know how Hasbro let this slip past their QC, and this is all ignoring how ugly and frustrating it already is that the heels peg in like this. Seriously, you couldn't make these sit flush. Then again, I'm talking to the company who makes their figures with tabs meant to hold them together be the key thing that's keeping them apart. And really, a retool of a figure that sat flush against the combine mode looks like it's tacked on now. This had so many chances to not suck and it took none of them. Number 8. Golden Discpterosaur. What do you get when you take an incredibly mid, though good posing Air-Razor figure and force it on any other character, then slam a mountain of bad sculpting on top of it? A steaming pile of shit! That's what you get. A figure that looks like the character if they went through an extreme bulimia phase and got a horrible skin condition at the same time. It poses as well as the Air-Razor, but with the atrophied limbs, it doesn't look quite right for the character, and the real problem with this is the transformation in alt mode. Air-Razor's transformation sucks as it is. A brief series of steps where you make the character pop a squat and put their hands into their jacket pockets. Further ruined by one of the most egregious cases of faux forming ever to curse a figure, where almost nothing ends up where it's supposed to. Basically 100% of it is cheating. And then Air-Razor's alt mode is unconvincing on the best of days, but now you've got Pterosaur who has all of that thing's problems, but with a botched sculpt on top of it. With obvious giant peg holes and large sections where the sculpting literally stops. There are blatant points where they literally gave up on sculpting the figure any further. I have never seen anything like this. It's shocking, and my only regret is that this isn't lower. Number 7. Legacy Skullgren. This is the one figure on this list that could really travel around. This was my introduction to Legacy Wave 3 QC, and let's just say that it left a bad taste in my mouth. But it wasn't the worst in that regard I was going to find. I've since learned that you can force the legs out to the side further than a 30, which I thought might be possible when I did my review of this thing, but I was too worried that it would damage the figure to try, so this does have much less insulting posing than I thought, and that does make me question if maybe this should have been a little bit higher or lower on the list. I'm not sure which. Which one would mean less bad? But the sad fact of the matter is that this figure belongs on this list, entirely because of that garbage alt mode. This is the epitome of turning into nothing. This isn't a tank. This is a piece of farm equipment that was retrofitted with a couple rocket launchers stuck on the ass end where the engine is, behind the carrot harvester on the front, which is the best explanation anyone has come up with for what this is. And it sure does kneecap the awesome heavy metal robot mode. Number 6. Legacy Blitzwing. Another figure with a pretty solid robot mode. It looks cool, it looks accurate, it's got the vibe. Hell, the transformations are even pretty fun. But you know what I'm going to say. The jet mode looks like it came out of the wrong side of a wrecking yard after a particularly energetic welder had an artistic streak all over it, and that tank mode is just so foul. People wonder why I'm okay with the Titan's Return tank when it's the wrong tank, but I rail against this thing for being the wrong tank. It's that I don't care if it's the wrong tank. It can be the wrong tank. The Titan's Return is a very solid Abrams tank, with fewer compromises that isn't a shell former and costs $20 less than this did at retail. Meanwhile, this is some made-up tank with the wrong turret, wrong treads, it's the wrong height, it's got the wrong body, the color layout isn't even close, and they stuck a single piece of heinous kibble on it that was put on the wrong side of the tank by accident in the show that was still way more hidden in the show and didn't look look like this in the show, then called it an accurate tank mode, and for some reason everyone bought it.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
It's like I look at this and see a donkey with a stick strapped to its forehead, and everyone else sees a unicorn. They aren't even remotely close. It's a beige and purple tank, and that's where the similarities end. And it could be that, and I wouldn't be losing my mind if it didn't have the pointless tank dick. If it's wrong, let it be wrong, and don't lie to my face that it's right by giving it a chode it shouldn't have. Number 5, Bumblebee Ravage. The only thing sparing this from a deeper slot in this list is the fact that this is a core class, and that almost makes it worse. Like, we know what core class is capable of, and at least this is relatively accurate to the movie it comes from, but my god, this thing poses like crap. It transforms worse with multiple instances of parts forming, despite the fact that the alt mode is nothing, and it shouldn't be hard to achieve, and well, we'll get to that later. But this wasn't worth the $10 it cost, and that's saying something. Number 4, Legacy Wild Rider. How a figure as bad as Wild Rider only got number 4 is a curse on our whole community. This is an amazing car wreck of a figure, likely only surpassed in its stupidity by that moronic retool it's spawning. A figure from the modern era worse than its Combiner Worth counterpart, which this is essentially a reimagining of. One with less posability despite being 6 years newer and a less enjoyable transformation, while still sharing the same terrible kibble, but in this instance they made it worse in a positively psychotic scheme to make it better. Get this, the kibble explodes apart, expanding to be bigger and uglier than ever, because somehow that will make it smaller and less ugly. I have no fucking clue. I'm convinced it was only handled this way to artificially increase the parts count so they could justify the deluxe price for it when it's got the engineering of a Legends figure. And then the transformation is just stiff and clunky and nothing moves like you want it to. No honorable mentions this time. This list was easy to make, but I didn't exactly have leftovers. Unless I include red trash, at which point I could fill up this entire list with it. Anyways, it's number 3. Kingdom Hot Rod. A figure which I counted as part of Wave 5, but claims to have been meant for Legacy. Yet you can't convince me that this isn't a Combiner Wars Legends figure that they didn't know what to do with. This isn't just bad, this is primitive. This feels like a Legends figure from before they knew how to make one of these. Like a prototype proof of concept that led them to holding off producing these for several years because no one could enjoy something like this, so why waste the effort in producing this new size class? It's wrong, it poses like shit, the transformation is garbage, it faux forms, the QC is bad, it can barely stand, and worst of all, it's ugly as sin in all of its modes. I put this in a drawer, and I probably should have just thrown it away because I will never display it, and honestly, what am I going to do with this thing other than stuff it in the trash? Number 2, Legacy Point Blank. This is a real bad figure to not be my number 1. It's a version of the character that no one prefers with absolutely fucked proportions, a hideous head, and jacked up posability. The legs work well, but the torso of this thing has got to be one of the biggest insults against the entire fandom we've ever experienced. I have talked to so many people who have disassembled this thing and put it back together wrong so it can't transform anymore just to fix some of the issues it has with the arms. They turned him into a red figure to try to get something more worth what they paid out for this. Let that sink in. A red figure was a preferable alternative to what they actually got. There is not a figure out there where I have ever sat there and thought, you know what? I wish this was more like a non-transforming figure that can't pose. Number 1, Bumblebee Soundwave. That's right, the first figure of the year is the worst figure of the year. A figure I got from Udon173 initially as a loan that he then realized he just didn't want back. So now it's stinking up my collection for all eternity. This is a gift, so you'd think that I treat it with some degree of decorum. But no, it's not worthy of that. I had fans at the time tell me I was wrong, unsubscribe to me for daring to be so unreasonable about this, do a review of the figure where they praised it to high heaven, then take that review down within a week and resubscribe because no, this really did suck as bad as I said and they finally realized that. The only thing this has going for it is looking like the character from the movie. Literally everything else is a sin against Soundwave. It poses like crap with the worst hot rod shoulders I've ever seen. Its integration with the Ravage just doesn't work. Turns out it's so tightly clearanced when it really shouldn't be that if your QC isn't perfect on both, then you just can't close the tape door without the back panel popping off. The transformation simultaneously does literally nothing, it's just the character doing yoga, and at the same time, it's way more difficult than it has any right to be. And then people try to cope by calling this alt mode a Green Goblin glider. Stop it! The meme isn't funny, and sometimes you just have to call a pile of shit a pile of shit. At least Point Blank had a fun transformation for the most part, and an enjoyable alt mode. This is cancer that metastasized into a lump of feces inside your body that has a window jammed into the center of it, and a gun slapped on top like a rotten cherry. Overall, it's been a great year in the fandom, full of remarkably fun toys. But the lows were impressively down in the dumps, trying to tank the whole average. And maybe you could argue that figures like Soundwave belong on the 2021 list, but when it's out basically on Christmas, that counts as next year's trash. And that's not half what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know, you know, what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.